Hi, I'm Edwin Samuelson. Welcome to the CineFiles. But anyway, as you know, everybody, this is Eric Cohen and this is Jeff Galashaw, and we're going to be discussing today gateway films. Now, we're going to ask, what is a gateway film? Well, a gateway film, this is basically, we're going to be talking about the films that made us love cinema today. When we were all young, we went to a movie theater and we saw a movie on the silver screen that just basically blew us away and made us love cinema, and why we're talking about this stuff today. And we're going to be discussing the films that inspired us to be where we are now. Now, I mean, there's many experiences as a child that you cherish. One of them for me was going to the movies. I mean, hell, I bet you had a lot of movies you saw with your father and your parents. I remember, in fact, one you said that you saw. You said we were talking about it on a previous show where you saw Superman with your father. Can you tell us about some of the films that you guys have seen that really changed your life and really made you who you are?
Well, for me, there were phases. As a little kid, I'd watch a lot of TV, and it went from Looney Tunes. I know it's sort of a silly thing to say, but Looney Tunes actually, I love Bugs Bunny. I love that stuff, and you would learn things through Bugs Bunny, like Barbara Seville, all that stuff. But that classic black and white movie that I used to watch when I was a kid a lot. I used to love like Abbott and Costello a lot. I was particularly obsessed with horror films. Used to watch that a lot. I would say, though, the film that kind of like flipped the thing for me was when my father first took me to see Star Wars. And I know that's like everybody's big kind of life-changing thing, especially if you come from a certain generation. But this is a film I'd never heard of. It was something my dad heard of. And one day, all I know is that he packed us in a car and said, we're going to go see this film called Star Wars. And I don't want to get too much to that because we already discussed it in our Star Wars episode. But I would say that the next phase was like when I realized I wanted film to be my life, where I realized I wanted to work in film somehow. And that was when I was in my late teens and I saw Blue Velvet. And that was the first time I saw a film where I went from, gee, I'm a real fan of this director and this style of filmmaking, to like, okay, this blew me away. I am now a cineast. Now I want to write about this, or I want to make this. And that was a big turning point for me, was Blue Velvet.
What about you, Jeff? What was your phase?
Like Eric, I started off as a kid, I really liked cartoons, but another thing that made me watch a lot of movies was that Channel 11, Channel 5, they would always have movies on like almost every night, and I would, usually sit there, watch these films. Half of them were bad, but some were like films like the Blues Brothers that opened up more films than I knew about. And I mean, every weekend my parents would always take me to a movie, just to have an activity for me. I mean, I had a normal childhood, Little League and all that, but I always wanted to go to the movies. But one movie that always really affected me and still affects me to this day is the Muppet movie. Even though, it made, puppets seem like human characters, and you had all these guest stars, and, they had the show, too, so it was like watching television stars turn into movie stars. But, the songs from that film really affected me, the Rainbow Connection, which told you that anything in your imagination, you could do it. The only thing that could really set you back is you. And that really had an effect on me of wanting to be a storyteller, because at the time I just thought I'd be a writer, or wanted to be a writer. And after that, I noticed that anytime I would think of a future career, whenever anybody would ask me what I wanted to do in the future, was based on films. I mean, after, I don't remember what the movie was, but I remember I wanted to be a marine biologist for a little while. And then once, after watching Rutger Hauer and Wanted Dead or Alive, I wanted to be a bounty hunter. And I was telling everybody I was going to be just like that.
You mean the Gary Sherman movie with Gene Simmons?
Yes.
That's the movie?
Which was one of my favorite films as a 12-year-old.
Dude,
that's a great B movie from that time, too.
I'm a big Gary Sherman fan.
I love that film.
I was just like, oh, I wanted to be just like that. But I would say that, like Eric, the film that really made me really want to be involved in the film industry was after I saw Goodfellas, which to this day I have never seen on the big screen. But watching it one night, I was just looking for something to watch, and I had heard about this film, and I really wasn't up on Scorsese. I knew the king of comedy. That was about it. But after watching that film, the way it affected me and the way it just like hit me with like a sledgehammer emotionally, I knew I want to be able to do this. If not as a director, then as a writer. If not as a writer, then as an actor. And up until, I would say, the movie Leaving Las Vegas, I actually more or less wanted to be an actor. I know, hard to believe out there, folks. Until after seeing Leaving Las Vegas, I know well, not we, but people talk shit about Nicolas Cage, but I knew I would never be able to be open enough in front of a camera that way. But I liked everything that went into the filmmaking of it that made it seem like semi-documentary. So I knew at that point, if I'm going to be in the film industry, it's either going to be as a reviewer or I have to work behind the scenes because I cannot, and I'd rather let people see an expression of my feelings rather than me actually being in front of the screen naked emotionally, which is ironic considering, sitting here reviewing movies and sometimes we get emotional when we talk about these films.
Well, it's because it's a very important part of your life. I mean, I kind of have a somewhat similar story like you. I was born here in New York, and my mother would take me to see a lot of movies as a child. And I mean, I would remember going, that was basically what we would do all the time. If we go see a movie every week, I would just point in the Sunday Times, had the big ads. I'd just say, this one, or this one, something, and she would take me. And I mean, some of the stuff I would see as a kid, I still to this day cannot believe that I got to see in the movie.
Was there a point, though, when these films that you were a fan of, where it became, because I was always a film fan, but somehow when I saw Blue Velvet, I was like, okay, I'm making that connection, film as art, and I'm going from being a film fan to being a cinephile.
I have to mention this one. One of the most memorable experiences I ever had in my life was seeing The Terminator the first time. I remember seeing that as a young kid, and I'd never seen a film like it before. It was very serious. It was a science fiction film, but it wasn't like a B movie. But the film, a few years later that I saw, that completely changed my life, and I think Mr. Andre Joseph will probably agree with me, was RoboCop. Seeing RoboCop for the first time when I was a young child was an experience I'll never forget. I still don't even help. When I was a kid, I mean, you could just buy a ticket in the movie. I went by myself. I was like 9 or 10 years old. I go into the theater, I saw the movie. I just remember sitting there just completely mesmerized watching the movie because I knew it was going to be great. Because you see the poster, you go, wow, this is going to be good. And sometimes you get unfortunate and you get hoodwinked into that and you just buy into it even though it's bullshit. It really wasn't that good, but you say it's good. RoboCop is a movie that delivered. The poster was great, the movie was great, everything afterwards. And I said, my God, this is fucking brilliant. And there was something about it, when I was a kid, I enjoyed it as an action film. But years later, when I got to go, of course, when you love a film, you rewatch it. And then you start to see all this new stuff in it. You see the artistry, the commentary on stuff. And I was like, wow, you can really talk about other subjects in film.
My mother took me to go see Twin Peaks Firewalk with me in the theaters. Whoa. Which the first 10 minutes, brutal with the fingernails taken out. And then there's a weird sex club scene, which when you're sitting next to your mother, is just really uncomfortable, including the film is just made me feel uncomfortable in general because I had never really seen anything that strange and out of my element so much. But to this day, I still actually really like the film.
What's weird is, we always have those weird experiences, like, you see a movie with somebody and you're just so uncomfortable. My great aunt, I saw Silence of the Lambs with, and I'll never forget that scene where you see Jamie Gunn in the
I only had experience if something was on TV and my parents were in a room, because my parents never took me to anything they didn't want me to see. Right. And they're strict about, no rated R films if you're under 17, that stuff.
Well, thank God.
And also what complicated things for me too growing up is that, I've said this over and over again, but it is important to what I'm going to say. I grew up in Europe, and they have different rating systems than they do here. Like I spent my middle school years in Switzerland, right? And a whole bunch of films. That was when I was in middle school. That's when Raiders of the Lost Ark came out. That's when Road Warrior came out. The first Rambo, First Blood came out. All these seminal films came out in the early part of the 80s. And Switzerland had really weird laws. And I'm convinced to this day that they weren't set up to protect kids. They're set up to keep kids out of the theater so they wouldn't bother the adults. So to see something like Raiders of the Lost Ark, you had to be 18. To see something like Star Wars, you had to be 16. Like all these weird things. And so you would have to try to somehow pretend or hope they think that you're older than you actually were if you want to get into things. And I remember literally being kicked out of cinemas for being too young, and that's why I would go see something else instead, because that's the only film I could get into. That's why I saw First Blood in the theaters, because the rating for that was less than, say, Raiders.
That's serious?
Yeah, if I recall. Or like, say, The Secret of NIMH, you had to be 14. I couldn't take my brother to see The
14?
Secret
To see
Nim.
The Secret Nim?
Right, right, yeah.
Yes.
No, it was these weird kind of things, but
Good God.
at the same time, on TV, they would show nudity and violence all the time. You know, they never cut the stuff.
I feel so lucky. When I was a kid, I'm not kidding. I was born in New York, but I lived in Memphis for a few years. I remember going up to the movie theater. I could pay like $3 to get children's admission. I go in and see like Beverly Hills Cop 2. I saw RoboCop by myself. I see all these movies. It was just like no big deal. Okay, yeah, no
But
problem.
a lot of these films I had to see on my own. I didn't have any, my parents, I don't have any crazy stories of my dad taking me to see something in the theater, and it was a totally inappropriate film for me to see as a little kid. My fond memories of my dad is that my dad was a sci-fi geek. He took me to my first James Bond film, which was Moonraker, because he was a huge James Bond fan.
Oh,
he
that
took
had
me
to
to
be
Star Wars.
that was your first
because
James Bond?
that was my one in the theater, and as a kid, I was like, this is awesome. This is awesome. And he goes to bed with chicks naked. You know, that was like my thing. But there was that, Star Wars, Superman, you know, The Black Hole. My dad was
that's
a
a great
film
one.
geek, and I went to see a lot of these things because he wanted to see these things. My other fond memory of my dad was, you know, you talk about revival stuff. I didn't know what revival was. I just knew that once a year we had this tradition. Every Christmas, my dad would take me to see a revival of Santa Claus Conquers the Martians. We used to see that
With Pia Zadora.
every year, yes. And I was obsessed with that film because I thought it was the funniest thing I'd ever seen. I didn't realize I was laughing because it was a terrible movie. I just thought it was really, really fun. And my dad and I would bond over this film, just like, you know, saying all the lines over and over again.
I can't believe. Well, I mean, there's a lot of movies I was lucky to see. I mean, my mother would take me to see everything. I saw I loved the canon films when I was a kid. As people everyone know, I saw Revenge of the Ninja in the theater. I saw Ninja 3: The Domination. I saw Exterminator 2 with my
Ninja
mother.
3: The
I love Ninja 3.
Domination.
That movie kicks ass. I saw that
Just
as a
coming
kid.
out on Blu-ray, by the way.
Yes, it's Shout Factory. That one I saw those. I saw Exterminator 2, which I still to this day thought was awesome. When I was a kid, I thought it was awesome. I said, my God, this movie is like the worst piece of shit I ever saw. I saw Exterminator, the first one.
I know which movie you're talking about.
Yeah, that one. I saw the first one too, which I still to this day cannot believe I got to see that in the theater. I saw Boy and His Dog. I saw Blue Thunder. Blue Thunder I loved.
You saw Blind Dog in a theater?
Re-released in 1983.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, it was great. I loved it. And
You see, this is my other high school. One of the great things about being in England at the time is that they are cinema lovers, and they treat their stuff with respect, even horror, whatever. And they would have, they would air stuff on TV all the time, uncut, and that also contributed to my education. I didn't have to go rent stuff or things like that. I was watching things like A Boy and His Dog and things like that on TV, getting the treatment it deserved, you know?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because, well, when I was in high school, I was lucky enough to be growing up at that time during the indie 90s when, it was the next film revolution. And so a lot of these films that, I don't know, maybe this next generation sees as classics, I was growing up going to see these films in theaters every week. And at the time, it seemed like anything that was independent was thought to be good. And I think that's when I started really realizing sometimes I might have had a different opinion on films than other mainstream people who were going to see indie movies. Because while there were some great indie films like Pulp Fiction, there were also, to me, a lot of pieces of crap that were only considered good because they were indie. And after a while, it just seemed like half the stuff that was indie was almost like a mainstream studio. Sometimes you had your good, sometimes you had your bad. But, I mean, the one film that really introduced me more to in the 90s, Pulp Fiction had a great influence on me, but the first one I remember seeing, it sort of like was my puberty because it was actually on a double bill at home with the Mighty Ducks, was Drugstore Cowboy, which I had heard about all on Siskel and Ebert, and I was a big...
Excuse me? Mighty Ducks and...
Yes,
I know, he's mentioning them both in the same sentence.
I'm explaining
Just
how I went,
wrap your heads around that,
Okay.
folks.
I went from childhood
come
to
back
puberty again. So this was my rite of passage. So yes,
That's shooting up pretty quickly, let me tell you.
yes, because I went from watching Mighty Ducks and it was at Blockbuster, and I was like, oh, I keep hearing about this film. Let me see it. Plus, it had Matt Dillon, who I at the time thought was one of the great actors because of films like My Bodyguard and Over the Edge. And then I watched this film, and I was just like, whoa, they're like shooting up. I wonder if this is real. But even though it dealt with like low life characters and underground, it showed also a love of them, and not that everything was black and white, because you found yourself kind of rooting for this character, even though he kind of is like kind of abusive to like Heather Graham's character. He doesn't hit her, but talks down to her.
Emotionally abusive.
Yes, and he's taking, he's stealing money from his mother. And but by the middle of the film, it's like, I really kind of like this guy though. And after that film, I literally gobbled up anything I could find that was made by Gus Van Sant.
Talking about indie directors, Jim Jarmusch
Yes.
was somebody that blew me away. I looked at this, I was like, wow, you can approach film this way. And it was something that he made look easy. I don't mean that as a
I mean as a compliment.
as a put down. It was like one of those things where I was like, wow, I see how he went about this, and I can do that. And that's where I was like, I made that also that transition to not just being a cinephile, like a student of film, but maybe I want to make movies.
Perfect
Stranger Than
example.
Paradise.
That's a perfect example. That's something I got to ask you. Like I said, I've gotten to meet Jim Jarmusch. I actually hung out with him at a party once, and it was a really unusual experience because he's no, just weird. Because the guy is just the nicest guy. He came right up to me and just started having a conversation about our favorite band, the Stooges. And he was a real cool dude. But what's so funny is that you see him, and he's just a regular, average guy. I mean, he's and he said he does look a lot like Lee Marvin. He does. He really does. I couldn't believe. I mean, when you mentioned that he's a member of that.
A member of Lee Marvin, some sort of Lee Marvin's men's club, and in order to be a member, you have to look like Lee Marvin.
He really looks like him. He really does. But you know what's funny? I actually had a phase of Jim Jarmusch too, which I like. I saw Stranger Than Paradise, and let me tell you something. I don't know why I love that film, because there's nothing really to it. Like you said, but it's so easy. And that's the thing, I could never tell you why I like the film. And the film is not for everybody.
Oh, no.
It's not, because it's just three people and having a conversation.
But a lot of people love that film, though.
It's a great
a lot of film students love that film.
I came to that film late. I really only saw it, I would say, for the first time maybe 6 years ago. And I ended up loving it, but I avoided it for a lot of time for that very reason, because it didn't look like something that I would enjoy. Even though the first Jim Jarmusch film that I did see and I loved was Night on Earth.
That's a great one. The one that I really like too, and like I said, I lived in Memphis, so as a kid I remember when they were actually filming it. I didn't see them filming, but there was a lot of articles in the newspaper about them filming, and that was Mystery Train. And when I finally got to see the film, I didn't know what the hell to make of it, because it was a very funny film, a very weird film. It had supernatural elements. It had, the ghost of Elvis.
It had an original voice.
Yeah, and it had, and let me tell you, Screaming Jay Hawkins is brilliant in casting.
And one of these days, I don't want to get into too detailed on Jim Jarmusch, because we should do a Jim Jarmusch show.
We will do all right, that's it. I'm announcing that. We'll do a Jim Jarmusch show.
But the reason I brought him up, it impresses me how, if he was making films today in the same way he was making films back then, I wonder how he would resonate with today's generation of film fans.
He wouldn't work.
Because it always amazes me how many people, you would think that Jim Jarmusch is one of those guys that's an acquired taste, but it always amazes me how many people actually like him no matter what. Because he's a very minimalist filmmaker. He's not flashy. He's not a show-offy kind of. He's more about ideas and writing. The script is more key. Sometimes the story isn't that important. It's just about, let's just see where this goes. Let's see how this plays out and see where it goes. If it doesn't go anywhere, fine.
I know he's revered right now, but he's somebody who's always inspired me, and has, even though some of the quality of his films has gone down, has always inspired me, was Kevin Smith.
Ah!
You knew he was coming up somewhere.
He comes up.
But dropping out of film school, taking the tuition, and making your own film, that really inspired me. And
I agree with you. That was very inspirational, that he did this with no money.
Exactly. And
he made it work.
And the interesting thing is, who he was inspired by, who very few people mention, Richard Linklater going out making Slacker with his own money. And, it's just that, I've just found all these filmmakers, they all definitely have their own voice, no matter what. But no matter what, their stories are what keep me, and I think keep a lot of others out there inspired, that you can make your own film, you can have your own voice. Whether it's going to be good or not, who knows? But you can go out there and do it if you really have passion for it.
Can you just go over what I don't want to say your favorites, but what would be the films? I'll just say what would be in your top 10. It doesn't have to be any order, just like the films that stay with you the most, that really have influenced you and made you love film.
It's really hard for me to come up with a top 10. The films that resonate with me to this day, I mean, Blue Velvet, I've already mentioned Blade Runner, I mentioned Sweet Smell of Success recently, Kiss Me Deadly. Heck, I'm a big fan of Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein, World Warrior, Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Unusual Taste.
Almost every Kubrick film I've seen. you know, Hitchcock. Almost every film Hitchcock's made, you know, Kurosawa, you know, almost everything he's made. You know, I'm everything he's made that I've seen. I'm such a lover of film that I can't. If you told me to come up with 10, I'll be kicking myself afterwards by saying, "Oh, I forgot this film, and I forgot this film,
That's
I forgot
gonna
this
happen.
film."
Yeah. I mean, I can just probably name a few right now. I'll probably forget one, but my favorite, the film that most probably affected me would be Santa Sangre by Jodorowsky. I love The Thing, Dawn of the Dead, Vertigo, Midnight Cowboy, Ballad of Narayama, which is a Japanese film, Seven Samurai, Yojimbo, which I hope Eric will think that I have some good taste there.
Hey, you're a Kurosawa fan.
I
That's
love
great
Kurosawa.
taste.
I think he's one of the greatest filmmakers who ever lived. My favorite other directors would be, of course, Kurosawa, John Carpenter, Argento. Well, he was, but his previous work, not his current work. And I'm a huge fan of I actually like 70s Japanese cinema quite a bit, and 60s and 50s. There's some very great stuff. They were very much influenced by American filmmaking and made their own films. I mean, you know, like I said, Kurosawa, absolutely, oh my God. I mean, every time you see one of his films, it's a reward.
And there's a lot of, I mean, Do the Right Thing's one of my favorite movies too. You know, Pulp Fiction's one of my favorite movies. You know, really, I can't. I don't like playing that game. All I can tell you is that if you're a passionate lover of cinema, it should be impossible for you to come up with a top 10 favorite films of all time. Having said that, Jeff, can you come up with a top favorite film?
I can
films
come
of
up
all
with
time?
favorite films that might go over 10, but I find like, no offense to you guys' ages, but you were a little bit before my time, so you
I'm
saw.
not that much older than you.
But you've seen more classic movies than I have, and I'm still trying to catch up on some of these films. But so my list constantly changes. But I would say some of the ones that really still mean a lot to me, of course, like the ones that we mentioned: Pulp Fiction, Clerks, The Muppet Movie. Audition by Takashi Miike, for instance, that had that meant a lot to me for some reason. I can't exactly explain. Big Trouble in Little China showed me, you know, you could do anything in cinema, really. It didn't necessarily have to make sense as long as it became cohesive to a story. I don't have the love of Kurosawa that you both have, but I will admit I haven't watched as much Kurosawa as the both of you. I've only seen 2 films. But like King of Comedy, Raging Bull, The Apartment really means a lot to me.
Great movie.
To me, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that is one of the very rare films where I can't critique it because everything about it is perfect to me. But, you know, I can see if somebody else did not have the same opinion. But to me, it's perfect. Also, you can also find my views on the blog, where I run a series called Jeff's Hall of Fame, which discusses this very thing.
And don't forget to watch Jeff's Unfinished Business,
where I mentioned like films that mean a lot to me, why they mean a lot to me. But you know, these films, hell, even a film that some people could see as a throwaway as 3 O'Clock High. I never saw High Noon before it, but that movie means a lot to me because growing up, you know, it was like a human cartoon. And again, as a kid, I was attracted to that film, but then as I got older and went to high school, those themes of being the underdog, bullying, the AV club, the school store, which I worked at in junior high school, all this kind of, you know, meant a lot to me. But I would have to say the cinema, like one of my favorite directors is Woody Allen. You know, his cinema means a lot to me. Just like the cinema of, surprisingly, Albert Brooks, it means a lot to me. And even though we have way different backgrounds, but somehow they speak to me as a person.
I have a question for you guys.
We should
This is
wrap
going
it
to mix things up a
Wrap
bit.
it
Then
up.
I guess we should start wrapping it up,
We
right?
should only have like an hour.
Okay. What was the first movie you went to in a cinema by yourself? You didn't go with a friend, you didn't go with family, you just wound up going to by yourself.
Dude,
I remember this specifically because my friend stood me up, but I wanted to see the film so bad. I saw it without
It
him.
might have been Back to the Future. Yeah, I think that was it, Back to the Future.
I'm going to embarrass myself, but it's still one of my favorite movies. Point Break with Keanu Reeves.
There's
and
nothing
Patrick
embarrassing
Swayze.
about that, dude. A lot of people are giving that a second look, and mine was Pink Floyd's The Wall.
How old were you?
God, I was really young. This was when
13.
I was in middle school. This was one of those films I could get into in Switzerland, even though I couldn't get into Raiders of the Lost Ark, right?
But you could get into the wall.
Yeah. And my friend was also a big Pink Floyd fan, and he either was showing up too late or he didn't show up at all. I was like, screw this. I want to see this. So it was the first film that I went to see by myself.
All right. Well, as you can see, this was a show as we rambled a lot, but I hope
Our most open show, I would have to say.
I enjoy talking about it. I enjoy talking about it. But we got to wrap this up. Anyway, I'm Edwin Samuelson. This was the CineFiles, and thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.